A large portion of the following script was written during the height of the lockdown-induced emotional numbness of 2020. Evidently, on the surface, for most people, life has returned to a greater sense of normality, contentment, and purpose. But the reason for posting this is just to willingly express my thoughts and creativity, even if those thoughts are dark, heavy, or nihilistic in nature. Everyone has a shadow or dark side, and if they are capable of articulating it, they should, at least to release the burden, if anything. The Swiss psychoanalyst Carl Jung popularized the concept of the shadow and saw it as the uncivilized, even primitive side of human nature. It is generally made up of the parts of ourselves we deem unacceptable. For many people, this means things like sadness, rage, laziness, or cruelty. Over the course of our lives, we relegate this portion of our personality to the darkness of the unconscious and put on personas and indulge in ego to bury the shadow deeper within us and hide it from the world, to outwardly appear permanently nice, happy, or stable. But no person is nice, happy, or stable all the time, and it is a falsehood to believe it is or ought to be the case. I have spoken about the pathetic cultural phenomenon of the nice guy or man-child in the past. The nice guy is a man who, like all men, still possesses a dark side, but has worked tirelessly throughout his life to suppress it, in order to appear as perfect as can be, convincing himself that never displaying or expressing his flaws, shame, shortcomings, or raw emotions to the world makes him good and likable, supposedly elevating him to a higher level of enlightenment or supremacy above the man that he sees as the jerk, bad boy, or obnoxious brute, when in truth, such actions are merely calculated tactics and not respectable at all. Masking his shadow makes the nice guy not good but insincere, and not likable but contemptible, especially in the eyes of women, who coincidentally, the cowardly and naive nice guy is obsessed with trying to impress. Within reason, one should not look to mask what they have deemed unacceptable, but instead learn to accept what they have deemed maskable, because it is not always maskable, and from time to time the mask will slip. So perhaps you should just obtain some courage and loosen the mask anyway, not to act out your shadow in the world, but to accept it and integrate it into your being. That will foster personal growth. I do not want to be the nice guy. Thus, through honesty, strength, and the development of my value as a man, I want some of the content of this channel to reflect the full spectrum of human emotion where possible, even the emotions we are uncomfortable with, because in my opinion, that is an indication of authenticity, and authenticity ought to be one of man's highest aspirations, if not his highest. As Carl Jung said, a whole person is one who has both walked with God and wrestled with the devil. So listen and take from it what you will. Let us begin. A dull ache, more darkness in a thought than a thought ought to possess. Built up tension, frustration strongly felt, but not so understood. Longing to outwardly emote in some form or another. Envisioning all that is distant, and yet still wholly capitulated to a weary haze of physical limpness. Days blend together, and time melts away, moving just as fast as it always has. Minutes turn to hours, hours to days, days to weeks, and later months, before one even takes notice of all that is lacking. An endless stream of scrolling color, dopamine-infused pixels of debauched erotica, and empty amusement in the spiritually tainted casino gulag of the modern mind. Vivid displays of boastful pleasure and enchanted self-involvement, masking a deep sense of odium, a scornful chasm. Leave the cave and observe the real world of this moment. The sanctity of words misused. The fierce finality of action excessive. What remains but nihilistic desolation? The pursuit of unbridled power built upon the rubble of a culture's former greatness. A swelling angst, uncertainty, the internal cultural wrestling of narcissism between feelings of both personal and collective worthlessness or grandiosity, absolutism, total weakness or total divinity, destitution or salvation. It is a peculiarity of Western-centric thinking to be conditioned by and focused on not the past, not the present, but the future. In the mind of the Westerner, that possible propagandized future alternates between apocalypse or utopia, both absolutes, the end of the world or 1,000 years of a glorious empire. No median. Yet in truth, the median is typically closest to reality, and seismic shifts occur at a glacial pace, outside of the perception of the majority of people. Yet the seismic shifts still do occur, and always have. It is best and most indicative of true strength to attempt to adapt to the given conditions of the world, and quietly channel the power to transform and overcome personal difficulty through your own will. Never complain, expect, nor demand that the world adapt to you. Yes, you are one individual with your own life, but you are separate to the world as a thing in itself. While you are the necessary subject needed to perceive the world as an object, with that perception ought to come the realization that if the world is in fact the monolithic object that you perceive it to be, then the world is much larger and more significant than you. Whilst you may be able to shape the direction of your individual life within the world, you are still subjected to the conditions of the world. The world is not subjected to you. Just as we cannot entirely control the systems of our own body as things in themselves, we cannot entirely control the world. The systems of our body and the world are functional or dysfunctional, irrespective of our will. The heart will beat, as that is all the heart is intended to do. The world will turn, as that is all the world is intended to do. In the case of the heart, it will beat or not beat, and this is without us being particularly conscious of it. The world is much the same. It carries on without us being particularly conscious of it. The only time we are conscious of our heart is when it is either beating at a faster rate than normal, or when it is not functioning as it ought to. Otherwise, we don't think of it and can't control it. Our heart could stop at any moment. A cancer or blood clot could grow and eliminate us at any moment, and we could be totally blindsided by it. Unexpected, unintended things occur all the time. That just demonstrates how fundamentally random life is, and how it is random even down to the existential level. We hope our body functions as intended, and our body will function as intended, or as close to intended as it can manage, regardless of if we take care of it or abuse it. Although obviously one should take care of their body, the body still always seeks to survive, and really the only way to override the body's innate imperative to survive is to submit to a disease of one's mind, and ultimately the final tragic act of submission to a disease of the mind against the organic imperative of the body would be to literally end one's life, which you could argue is obviously the ultimate act of nihilism. If one knows of their shadow, is one at greater risk of embracing it in an inadvertent outpouring of emotion? Is one still in control if a fracture were to occur? Is the shadow the brewing and boiling over of natural passion, or is it the manifestation of evil? Profound introspection is a simultaneous blessing and curse. Once mental fixation of that magnitude is realized, the only true known escape would come after life, be it blissful or otherwise. The best thing one can do is to be entirely aware of the shadow, but learn to control it or harness it. Be aware of your monstrous capacity for evil, but channel it into productivity and the developing of the capacity for strength and violence, not to be violent, but to possess the capacity to be violent and control it through discipline, thus embodying a more complete expression of traditional masculinity, as martial arts instructs one to do. Of course, if and when these things are shared, they are met with a great rush of obloquy. Most do not want to explore a line of such questioning and recoil violently at mere suggestion. Hollow contentment is all they seek and all they obtain. For them, that is the world and the life they inhabit. They know no different. At a time like this, it is strangely fascinating to think that in an urban-based society, one can live frankly anonymous, even to those in close proximity, such as the neighbours. As I stated in my review of the German sociologist and philosopher Ferdinand Tönnies and his book Community and Society, in contrast to community and culture, society and civilization are temporary and shallow. Thus, community and culture ought to be understood as a living organism of sorts, surviving only within those who invest in it and nurture it. Society and civilization ought to be understood as a mechanical and technological amalgamation. Community is an old phenomenon. Society is a new phenomenon. It could be said that community is felt emotionally, whilst society is constructed intellectually. Culture and community are rural-based. Civilization and society are urban-based. Community is the lasting, genuine form of living connected together. Society is living separate whilst connected. It may appear as a community in name, but not a community in fact. In prior eras, individuals fostered greater connection with one another due to closer proximity, and thus stronger ties within groups, in more confined areas. In a genuine community, everyone knows each other, as the degree of separation between individuals is less than in a society. Stronger connection would generally lead to stronger feelings of friendship and kinship. In a modern liberal atomized individualistic society, however, the level of codependence amongst people is somewhat superficial. The individual lives their own life, makes their own decisions, and thus considers themselves the measure of all things. As such, friendships suffer and bonds begin to weaken. In a society, the typical individual no longer feels the need for others, only the need for the expertise of others. This has become more prevalent since the days of the Industrial Revolution, development of the professional workforce, and the advancement of technology. All this is considered means of progress. An individual may approach another individual, exchange money for goods and services, and then both individuals go their separate ways, and the closest they come to meaningful connection is well-mannered pleasantries. The customer at the supermarket does not care much for the checkout attendant, and the checkout attendant does not care much for the customer. The customer just wants efficient and fast service. They do not have time for conversation, as they have other errands to run on their busy daily schedule. Meanwhile, the checkout attendant cannot spend too long chatting to customers, as they are meant to be working, and are just there to quickly complete the menial tasks of their job until it is time for them to finish their shift and go home. Very little sense of community is established in such a scenario. Treating relationships as merely transactional has become so widespread in the modern world that there is even a common idiom that states, people are only friendly to you when they want something in return. When you progress as a society, you regress as a community. And community is very important for health and well-being. Without it, you risk becoming sick, both physically and mentally. As an aside, the notion of the neighborhood urban legend is especially interesting, the twisting of reality and fiction. These written musings could well be the work of a future published author or successful writer, and his neighbors may be none the wiser until well after the fact. Sitting in silence, hearing nothing but rumblings of nearby traffic on the freeway, and the thought comes to mind, I wonder where each car is journeying to. Oh, to be a fly on the window of a passing vehicle as they travel on the dimly lit road. The daily traffic, both connected and separate, together and alone. Persistent personal expressions, seemingly counterintuitive to the epoch, but all around me, faces are overwhelmed and publics crowded with frustration, every soul disjointed and every finger pointed, an eerie milieu. Guess this is madness for you. Even in periods of relative ease, the necessity of the steam valve is evident. Whilst emotions are vented and feelings aired, there remains the void. Being aware of feeling down, but having that feeling be largely unexplainable. Sad but never crying, angry but never violent, hot and heavy. Success may be tasted briefly, but what next once the buzz passes or the hype dies down? Always, what next? Addictive personalities, longing for material comfort, stability, and physical security to provide an answer to a possible metaphysical question. Is one even worthy of the life envisioned? A litany of thoughts that does not subside. All cylinders constantly firing, unrelenting movement and pressure, networks of technical information continually refreshing. This is the modern world. No peace to be found here yet. The escapism of nirvana is in the mind and spirit, if anywhere. Such is my passion for the topics I discuss that I've started a Patreon and now most recently an Odyssey channel, because I know that passion won't fade. So if you enjoyed the video or find my analysis and insight valuable, please consider showing some support and join the discussions of upcoming video essay topics and future book reviews. Your recommendations would be welcome. I will eventually post channel updates regularly on both sites, and will give you some insight into the next books or ideas that will be used for content. Follow the links in the video description below or on the channel About page under links. Thank you very much for the feedback and support you've shown thus far.